Good morning, guys. Yeah, let's hope we have a stable enough data feed this morning so that we can uh, have a constant live video. Otherwise, I will do a ordinary video and just load it up on Facebook again. Yes, I wanted to speak to you yesterday evening about a host of issues that seem to be one at a time or one on its own. Every one of them, but it's not. All of them are simply in the end in the back office of the bad guys, interrelated, and that is why we need to speak about it as a package. So let's start off with the first issue, and I don't want to say too much about this one because we already know that an attempt was made on the life of Janus Walus. So I'm not going to speak too much on the issue, but I need to just air a few thoughts and opinions I have about the whole incident and the whole saga of Mr. Janus Walus. Those that have been with me long enough will know that I was part of a campaign many years ago to release Mr. Clive Derby Lewis. Where do they fit together? Mr. Clive Derby Lewis and Mr. Janus Walus were the people decades ago brought before court and charged and found guilty and sent to prison for the assassination of the then South African Communist Party leader Chris Hani. Now, of course, there's a huge body of conspiracy, fact, fiction, everything entangled into this whole incident. People feel that it was a contract killing. It wasn't just simply Mr. Clive Derby Lewis and Janus Walus who decided upon taking a drastic measure against the Communist Party leader Chris Hani. You must remember Mr. Clive Derby Lewis was a member of parliament and a very high-ranking official in the then Conservative Party. The Conservative Party, of course, does not exist any longer. I think it disbanded somewhere in the mid 1990s. But the Conservative Party at that point in time was extremely strong, so much so that it was calculated that with the next general elections just before 1994 and the give over of power to the ANC, and we know that the ANC at that point in time still was seen to be a terrorist organization. It was listed as a terrorist organization by both the CIA and the FBI, amongst others. But it was calculated that the Conservative Party would have won the elections, the next round of elections against the then National Party, if it would have taken place. We know now it did not take place. We know the history. We were there. We experienced it. By 1992, all the legislation relating to the old system in South Africa was dropped. By 1994, a so-called new dispensation was put into place. It was underpinned by an interim constitution. The interim constitution dates from 1994, and eventually in 1996, the current constitution as we have it today, was promulgated as the law of the land, as the highest law of the land, and the dawn of the new South Africa officially took place. Okay, where do the issue of Janus Walus then fit in? During the campaign about the release of Mr. Clive Derby Lewis a couple of years ago, I can state the following as fact. I know that certain people are disputing these things, but it's known fact. Mr. Clive Derby Lewis was at that point, and for very long time before that, represented by an attorney, Mr. Marius Kurtze. I met Mr. Kurtze on various occasions. In fact, we were quite close, also forming part of, I don't know if he was ever part of the old Front National, but we were definitely cohorts in the National Conservative Party that we established some years later in 2016. So I know Mr. Kurtze very well. Mr. Kurtze for the most part, pro bono, drove the legal aspect of the release of Mr. Clive Derby Lewis at the time. Then there was a very unfortunate incident when people started to realize that most probably he will get paroled, that he was stabbed in prison by a fellow inmate with a broken bottle or piece of glass. It was very difficult to establish exactly what happened. At that point, Mr. Clive Derby Lewis was also extremely sick. If I remember correctly, he had lung cancer, or at least some infection or illness of his lungs, to the extent that we all realized that if we did not get him out as quick as possible, that he would die in prison. Long story short, in the end, Mr. Kurtze did not represent him any longer. A new legal team came on board, but very close after that, he was indeed released on parole. He was paroled. Mr. Clive Derby Lewis spent the last few days that he had with his wife and his family in isolation. I know there was one attempt by AfriForum to hijack the whole thing for themselves and to have an interview with Mr. Clive Derby Lewis, in which it was actually suggested that they had something to do with it, which was an absolute lie. In fact, they distanced themselves from the issue when we first went to them before his release, and then after his release, as per usual, AfriForum tried to hijack the whole thing. I know that there was indeed a video also made, and I'm not going to mention names today because we're not going to get personal, by a certain member of AfriForum when he went to so-called interview Mr. Clive Derby Lewis and then make it the issue that they somehow solved. It's not true. The most work, the hardest work, was done by a man called Wessel Basson. In later years, unfortunately, my paths with Wessel diverged for various reasons. I'm not going to discuss that, but he and his daughter and Mr. Kurtze himself visited Mr. Clive Derby Lewis often in prison, sending out illicit pictures because you're not allowed actually to take pictures, but visiting him there, reporting on his well-being, went so far as to take in, for instance, food packages, things that are allowed, that's not seen as contraband by the prison authorities. So we were always and constantly updated on the well-being of Mr. Clive Derby Lewis in prison by Wessel Basson and his daughter. Okay, that was then. Now, in the meantime, Mr. Janus Walus was still in prison. He applied for parole, I don't know how many times. I'm literally not aware how many times. And every time it was unsuccessful. Now, you must remember that the decision about parole does not rest with a court of law. It rests with the Commissioner of Correctional Services. In other words, you go as an inmate, as a prisoner, you go before a commission or committee appointed by the Department of Correctional Services and the Director General of the Department of that State Department. Then state your case. There's certain reasons why a person can be paroled, and then on grounds of that, parole is either granted or not granted. In most other cases, you will find that parole is very easily granted. There's various reasons for that. We don't have to explore it here. However, Mr. Janus Walus was not successful in any of those attempts and those applications up to now. And I want to come to the up to now in a moment. Now, you must remember that Mr. Walus is a Polish citizen. He immigrated to South Africa not very long before the incident of Kresani took place. He was an extreme anti-communist for the very simple reason Poland at that point came out of communist oppression that fell over them after 1945 and the practical occupation by the then Soviet Union. You will remember in the 80s, if you have that long memory or you observed it yourself, the Polish were some of the first to stand up against communist rule in their country. There was a very powerful trade union movement. It was called Solidarity. Solidarność, no connection in any way with the South African trade union Solidarity, but a trade union called Solidarność, and they were instrumental in having the Poles rise up against communist rule and eventually ejecting it from their country. And on the back of that, you must remember the background to this, Mr. Walus immigrated to South Africa. He saw South Africa as one of the last, let's call it castles, last stands of conservative rule, what he perceived conservative rule. And I think that was mostly his reason why he came to South Africa shortly after that. You must also remember something, that he became involved in conservative politics in South Africa, not actively per se. Very shortly after that, he was part and parcel of the Conservative Party, and he knew Mr. Clive W. Lewis, who himself was a very high up person, as I already explained, in the Conservative Party at that time. So it's very clear to me that he saw himself as a warrior, as a person then fighting communism. And then, before his eyes, he saw the lapse of South Africa from what he was running away from, communism and the failed system and the failed country, when in the late 80s, early 90s, we saw the gradual rendering or surrendering of power and control in South Africa to the ANC, South African Communist Party conglomerate. You must remember that the South African Communist Party, still even up to today, is the brain trust of the ANC. The ANC is the big national front, African nationalist or national party, and the SACP, the South African Communist Party, is basically brain trust running the ANC, the Congress. It's called the Congress because it was actually in 1912, when it was established, made up of various different factions and other parties and groups, etc. That is why it's called the African National Congress, standing as a party, a political party today, and having governed South Africa now for close on 30 years. It's very close on it now. Okay, that is the quick background to what happened here. There was an assassination that took place on Mr. Chris Hani. He was the leader of the South African Communist Party. He was seen as a radical, extremely left in his views. There's other people later on, and even at the time, who told us that Mr. Hani is actually a very good person, and he's here for the good of South Africa. If you align yourself with an ideology like communism, which killed in its time more than 400 million people. Yes, you're hearing me right, 400 million people. That is the bloodbath communism leaves. It leaves countries decimated. It leaves peoples and populations basically destroyed. It overturns everything and anything that is the basis and the fabric of society. You must remember all these things. If you align yourself to the ideology of communism, you cannot be a good person. Full stop. You cannot be, because you're aligning yourself to the most evil political system ever devised and thought out by humankind. Leave that aside. That's my own opinion about things. As I said, Mr. Walus and Mr. Clive W. Lewis were indeed found guilty in a court of law, and they were sent to prison for very long. Clive W. Lewis eventually was paroled on medical grounds. He succeeded on medical grounds. Janus Walus went on for many years after that to fight for his freedom, to be paroled. And then, you heard it about a week ago, he was indeed, by order of the Constitutional Court and by Judge Raymond Zondo himself, then ordered to be released. There's an actual court order saying to the correctional services that they must release him within 10 days as of the date of that court order. The court order was indeed delivered on correctional services. They acknowledged receipt of that. And yet still, Mr. Walus was not released. What happened in the meantime? It was all over the news. There was an attempt on the life of Mr. Walus by one of the inmates who somehow got hold, and we don't even have to explore the somehow, because it's a prison. We know what goes on in prisons. Got hold of a sharp object, supposedly a knife or a dagger or something to that effect, and he stabbed. Thank God he did not stab something vital. It was a very deep wound, as I could ascertain, but it was not fatal because neither the heart or any of the vital organs were damaged in the stabbing. He is now, as we speak, still lying in hospital. And then the Department of Correctional Services issued a very strange media release yesterday to say that they will not release him until he is fully healed, or he is, well, healed from the attack. Now, that is not what the court said. The court said within 10 days he's out. So I want to see what his legal team, and I'm not criticizing, I want to see what his legal team is going to do next to secure his release. There's nothing about illness, there's nothing about injury, and we can go on speculating why it happened. People are saying they wanted to take him out in prison just before he can come out, so that he cannot tell the truth and say who instigated, who paid, who gave the instruction, what. I don't concern myself with that. I just want to see Mr. Walus being released and repatriated back to Poland, because Poland already said he can come back. In fact, many years ago, that undertaking was secured from the Polish government. He has a daughter in Poland who said that she will gladly take her father in. We know that his life has been ruined. It was taken from him. He's been sitting in prison now for decades. That is all I want to see. I want to see Mr. Walus back in Poland, and then reunited with his family and especially his daughter, for him to spend the last days of his life in peace and quiet, and not be disturbed any longer, and his life not further stolen from him. That's my opinion. That is my sentiment about this. All the conspiracy theory running around, he was instructed by the New World Order, he was instructed by Mandela, he was instructed by this one and that one and the following. With the greatest respect, I don't care. I don't care. Even if that's the truth, he was the unfortunate person who did the deed. He was the patsy, if you want to call it that. He was the person who, in the end, with Mr. Clive Derby Lewis, took the hits. So I don't concern myself at this stage in any way with the conspiracy theory running around him, even the facts, even the legitimate questions relating to this issue. I just want him to be repatriated, to be released from prison, so that he can spend the rest of his life in peace. That's it, full stop. I hope and I pray that there will not be further attempts on his life, as it was already very clearly indicated by certain sections of the ANC and the South African Communist Party and various other extremist extremist left-wing organizations. I certainly hope that he physically survives what is going on at this point in time. It would be a very sad day if indeed they take his life now, right at the end of this battle. Just as a footnote to this, and we didn't realize this, if you were watching the Soccer World Cup, you would realize that Janus Walus is seen as a hero, an anti-communist hero in his home country, Poland. We were not even aware of that. But we saw at the Soccer World Cup that his image and certain messages were put on huge banners that were displayed by the Polish soccer fans there. So it's very clear that the sentiment in Poland is pro-Janus Walus. Actually, he became a hero to them. He is seen as a hero by the Polish, an anti-communist hero. Very strange turn of events. It's very ironic, given the background to this whole thing. And here's the thing. You usually become immortal in death if you give your life to something, to a cause that elevates you and your memory. usually to immortality. So maybe those planning the death of Mr. Janus Walus, because very clearly this is planned, maybe those people should reconsider, because all that you're going to create an immortal hero and an immortal martyr if you take his life. You must understand that. Let the man go in peace. Just simply let him go in peace. Let him go back home. Let him go to his daughter, his beloved family. Just release him. Because you're doing things at this point in time that politically, and we're speaking of a political game here, is most probably going to come and bite you in the ass. You know me, I'm a straight talker, so I'm saying it to you directly. It's going to come and bite you in the ass. You're going to create a martyr and hero that will become immortal. The image of Clive Darby Lewis became immortal at the time, and the image of Janus Walus will become immortal if he dies as a martyr. So you must be very careful of the political games that you are playing. Let's leave that aside. Let's deal with the next big issue that was in the news the past week, dominating the last few days, the so-called resignation of Ramaphosa from the presidency of both the ANC as well as South Africa, the Republic of South Africa. Not going to happen. Not going to happen. I said it 2 days ago, if I remember correctly. I said it, I made a little joke about it. I call him Ramapala, relating to his very well-known statement that white people are like frogs. They sit in boiling water. They don't even know that. And we as the ANC will just simply turn up the heat until such time the frog dies, not even realizing that he's been cooked. That statement of Mr. Ramaphosa is well known, and that is why I usually have a little smile, and I call him Ramaphosa. And I said Ramaphosa will not resign. Why will Ramaphosa not resign? As I explained in previous videos, the ANC is not a political party. It purports to be a political party, but it's actually a criminal organization, an organized criminal organization. Its main purpose is not to govern a country. Its main purpose is to siphon money and be a useful tool to do criminal deeds in South Africa and even across the borders of South Africa. We know these things. We know these things. I'm not going to recap on that. You can go and watch my videos on the issue that has been published years before what I'm saying today. This is not something new. It's very well known. Political analysts, left, right, and center. No, I'm not going to call names. Oh, and I'm so tempted to do that. At all kinds of different theories on why and how and if. The simple fact of the matter is that Ramaphosa at this point in time is the biggest enabler within the ANC as a criminal organization. He's the guy bringing in the money. Now, as long as he is the man bringing in the money, they will not lift him out of power. There's a lot of speculation now, and people being at the conference being elected from the floor, so-called from the floor, and all kinds of very interesting discussions and predictions, and with the greatest respect to the people busying themselves with all this nonsense, you're being diverted or you are totally uninformed. The ANC does not operate in this way. Let's take the example of Thabo Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki was recalled by the ANC. That is the only mechanism through which they can terminate his position as president of South Africa, not of the ANC, because there's a difference between the two. You must remember the ANC follows a formal system, a very well-known system of cadre deployment. It's not a conspiracy theory, it's their actual policy, cadre deployment, which simply means that they delegate a person to do a certain job. And in this instance, Ramaphosa, as the elected president of the ANC, was cadre deployed as to be the president of the Republic of South Africa too. Now, as in Mbeki's case, the only way to terminate that would be for the ANC to recall his appointment, his instruction as a cadre, and recall him then. That is the only way that the ANC can and will lift him from the presidency of South Africa. There is no need for Ramaphosa to resign. I know people are now speculating and saying, no, he was playing a poker game and he was actually, in a way, extorting the ANC to say to them, yeah, okay, I will resign, but then I will fold you from the inside. Guys, really, you don't understand, you simply don't understand the nature of the ANC as a criminal organization, if that is your train of thought. It's not what will happen. The ANC can make a decision to recall him. But now the problem exists that inside the ANC, who will then be the biggest enabler? We know the RET faction, it's Ace Magashule and these guys were mostly reliant on Zuma himself, Jacob Zuma, to be the enabler. Zuma is out in the cold. He will never come back in the ANC as a force to be reckoned with. That is why they are trying his lieutenants now, one of which being Mkhize, and maybe even Lindiwe Sisulu. But Zuma himself is old man. He's 80 years plus. He can't stand in the elections in the ANC as the president for a very simple reason. He's facing effective jail time at this point in time on grounds that his medical parole failed. So if you're too sick to go to prison, then how the hell can you stand as the president of the ANC or the Republic of South Africa? People thinking in that way just simply don't understand simple logic. It's not going to happen. Zuma is out in the cold. He's on the planks, right? His lieutenants are mostly ostracized within the ANC. They are seen to be troublemakers. They are seen to be people that stepped out of line. The only one maybe with a fighting chance still is Ace Magashule, for the very simple reason Ace is a hardcore gangster. He's a hardcore gangster. You don't get rid of Ace. He knows how to survive. So even in the absence of Zuma, and he knows it, he will survive. He will go on with whatever he's busying himself with. But the chances of Ace now becoming the president of the ANC has dropped virtually to zero, because he aligned himself to a faction in the ANC that has basically been ostracized and dissolved from their inner ranks. It's as simple as that, guys. It's as simple as this. Where does that leave the resignation of Ramaphosa? Let's discuss it. People simply don't understand what happened the past week. All that happened was that a committee constituted by Ramaphosa himself, now please take that as a footnote, found that there is a prima facie case that there was possibly then criminal activity relating to the Palapala incident. Okay, now let's quickly dissect what I just said. A committee or commission that was formulated by Ramaphosa himself found this. Now, Ramaphosa is not a stupid person. He knows how to leverage. He knows how to leverage. So if it comes from his own ranks, his own people, his own committee, he's saying, no, there's a prima facie case, and I want to come back specifically to what that means, then I suspect he's leveraging his power from the inside. And remember, this is only a commission, a committee, a commission of inquiry that has no legal standing whatsoever. It has no legal standing whatsoever. It's not a court of law. You must remember this. It's a commission of inquiry, or commission then to look at the report relating to Palapala. Then it says there's a prima facie case. Now, what does prima facie mean in legal terms? It just simply says that on first value, when I look at the information in front of me, usually police docket, in this case, reports about the whole incident of Palapala, on first instance, prima facie, there is a case against him. But it does not mean anything in real terms to say that there is a prima facie case against a person. Why? Because there's also a rule in law called audi alteram partem, simply meaning both sides must be heard. Now, that is why you have prima facie case on the one hand and rebuttal on the other side, and then in a court of law, in this case a criminal court of law, the case must weigh much more than the rebuttal for it to be successful. There has not been a civil suit lodged against Ramaphosa. I don't know who will do that, because who's the victim here? And there is, at this point in time, no indication from the National Prosecuting Authority or from SAPS that they will actually proceed with a prosecution against Ramaphosa. So what do we have? We have a commission of inquiry constituted by Ramaphosa himself saying that on first instance, yes, there's a crime. There's something strange that was going on here. And nothing else. Now come on, put the pieces together. Don't you see what is happening here? Don't you see that the whole issue of Palapala is being fizzled out? Okay? This is what's happening. The chances of Ramaphosa being charged criminally and formally brought to court by the National Prosecuting Authority, to my view, is virtually zero. And even if that happens, you must remember that the state will then still have to prove beyond reasonable doubt that he indeed committed a crime, and therefore we're speaking of years of litigation that is in front of us. Even if the court a quo, in other words, the court first hearing this matter makes that finding and find him guilty on that charge or charges or whatever, then he will obviously appeal that, and I can assure you that after the appeal, it will most probably then go to Constitutional Court. So we're speaking here of years, possible years, decade of litigation if something indeed goes ahead relating to Palapala. Ramaphosa is not going to resign. And if he resigns, that very small little window of opportunity for the people out there hoping for it, the person that will come after him will simply be another enabler, then most probably under the control of Ramaphosa himself. A lot has also been said about Ramaphosa being the agent of the West. People, if you understand the bad guys out there, you will realize that national borders or West and East does not exist to them. It does not exist. Hear what I'm saying today. To them, there is not the United States of America. There's not a Germany. There's not a Britain. There's not a France. There's not a South Africa. There are no national borders, right? To the bad guys out there running the show, these things are just simply of academic interest. So to come and say, yes, he's the agent of the West, and the British are now running the show, and the Americans are running the show. People, you don't even understand the most core and the most basic things of what control over this planet actually comes to and comes from. National borders doesn't matter. Do you really think countries are still fighting one another? They are being used in wars and conflicts just simply as pawns, but national borders and the whole idea of nation states or states being ramped up against one another just simply does not exist. It's as simple as that. So please, don't run around with absolute nonsense, because what you're running around with is absolute nonsense. Okay? Let's see what the week holds. I will put money on the fact that Ramaphosa will not resign from the presidency of either the ANC or the Republic of South Africa. I leave the little door open. If he does, the next enabler would just simply be put into place. It's as simple as that. So we're not better off either way. We're not worse off either way. Well, maybe we're worse off. We will have to see. But yes, that's the simple facts relating to Ramaphosa. And then, here's the big thing. The South African economy has been sabotaged for at least the past 25 years. It has been sabotaged to a point where big companies in South Africa are folding. The energy crisis in South Africa is made, it's manufactured. Eskom is selling surplus, now listen to this, surplus electricity to our neighboring countries. Now, if they are selling surplus, it means that there's enough inside the borders of South Africa. We know those things. If you go and look at the power, then the actual power generation numbers and figures of Eskom, that's not been cooked. Sometimes it is being cooked. And you look at the domestic market, in other words, the people buying, you will find that there is a surplus, simply meaning they are making more energy, more electricity than we can use, and that is why they are selling it off. Okay, but still we have power outages, and we have load shedding, and we have populations being controlled by lights on, lights off, because it's a control mechanism also to a certain extent. But the main purpose of this whole exercise is to bankrupt South Africa on the inside, to crack the economy on the inside, which have been extremely resilient. The business people of South Africa is a different type, and I know them so well because I've been dealing with them for decades. They stood up to the challenge. But you can only so long stand up. And you saw now with lockdown, you saw with all the measures being put into place 2 years ago, still running up to today to a certain extent, and the energy crisis and a whole host of other issues. Over-regulation, for instance, of the labor market, over-regulation of taxation, all these things. I call it the war on the business community. Even despite that, they've been resilient and they stood, but you can only stand so long. So the main objective remains the implosion of the South African economy. Why? Because it means that the big international conglomerates can come in, they can buy up for free or for very, very little money, and they can just simply then from there on run the show. We've also seen what's happening to the power supply in South Africa, whereas 2 or 3 years ago it was impossible to even speak to government of alternative energy, alternative electricity being put onto the grid. They are now issuing licenses left, right and center. We know that private companies, private providers will start producing energy and electricity in the very near future. Some of them are already online. So why is this happening? Well, go and look who's receiving the licenses, and you will start to realize that it's just simply we're taking the big conglomerate, or it's not a conglomerate, my mistake, the big state-owned entity, SOE, Eskom, and we're diverging. We're siphoning the power and the money to a host of smaller entities that forms part and parcel of the whole thing. It's a simple thing that's happening. People now see it as the most positive thing. You must remember something: the moment that you put the supply of energy into the hands of individual companies, you're going to find it very difficult to control the pricing of the electricity. Very difficult. Residential people out there, the small little amount of electricity you're using, and load shedding that's being exacted on you, does not even scratch the surface. These guys are after the industry of South Africa, the mines, the big factories. People working in the steel industry, you know that many steel operations, big ones, and for that matter, all the other metallurgical industries, just simply came to a standstill because you simply cannot run those operations without proper electricity. So in future, you're going to be at the mercy, at the gunpoint of the people providing electricity to South Africa. Okay, last issue, rand, our currency. Our currency is tanking, and it will tank. In 2 days, it went down about 2 rands to the dollar. I predict that within 6 months from now, it will halve in its value. Simply meaning that in 6 months' time, and I will put money on this, in 6 months' time from now, you as one individual will not be able and in a position to buy a meal to feed yourself for 100 rand. Think of what I'm saying. Go and look at your expenses, go and look at your salary. Your salary can never increase to the rate that the rand is actually deteriorating, because people always look at the inflation number, or the inflation percentage to be the gauge at what tempo people are getting poorer, because that is in effect what inflation means. You have a certain amount of money, if things get more expensive, it means you need to spend more money. So actually what's happening, you're actually losing money. So it makes you poorer. But that's not what you must really look at. You must look at what is happening to the currency, and the currency is going down. It's going down very quick. So the rand itself will tank. it's tanking already. Please don't look on a day-to-day basis. Don't even look on a 7 days basis. I know you can draw those numbers and figures. Go and look what happened over the past, let's say, 5 years, 10 years, and you will realize that with your rand, you can now buy most probably not even half that you could have bought 2 years back. And now we're on the slippery slope. It's falling, and it's falling like a stone. So yes, the rand is tanking. Why is that important? Energy. We buy our energy, our fuel from overseas in mostly dollar. Also, maybe in the future, ruble. It will be very interesting to see what happens there. Maybe also in the future, yuan. That's Chinese currency. Although China itself is experiencing a very strange and very unexpected problem, and it's not about COVID. I quickly want to speak to you about that also. But we buy our fuel, our crude oil that's been imported there in Durban into those big tanks. You can go and have a look for yourself there. Also a little bit down in the Western Cape. We're buying in dollar. Now, if rand dollar changes dramatically, which it's changing, it means that every liter of oil, crude oil, please people, I see some of the age group think we're speaking of the oil you buy of the rack, sunflower oil. We're speaking of crude, the sticky black stuff that comes from under the ground, right? If the rand tanks against the dollar, every liter of crude coming in, or ton of crude, or whatever measurement gauge is used for that, it means that becomes proportionally more expensive to buy in. And then, of course, it means that it will become exponentially more expensive for you as the end user of the petrol you put into your car and the plastics you buy in the store and everything that is being created and made out of crude oil will become exponentially more expensive. Now, the knock-on effect of this is very simple. South Africa is a huge country logistically. The people in the logistics industry, many of them my clients, they know exactly what I'm speaking about here. South Africa's main economic underpinning is not agriculture, and it's not mining, it's not all these other industries. It's logistics. It's moving stuff from one place to the other. And to move stuff from one place to the other, you need diesel or petrol, but mostly diesel. Diesel is manufactured from crude oil. We buy crude oil from outside in dollars. So in other words, moving stuff from one place to the other exponentially then also becomes more expensive. So you start to see the knock-on effect here, directly, indirectly, on more than one tier. People, I'm warning you again, the South African economy is going down. It's going down very fast. Even despite the resilience of business people, even despite the business people doing their best to keep this ship afloat, right? And your dollar, your rand against the dollar and the euro and all the other major currencies is dropping. You can go and look at the graphs yourself. It's dropping. The trend is that people are selling off their rands as quickly as possible. The currency investors are selling off their rands. And therefore there is no demand for rand anymore. We will come to a point where it's being dumped, and we're very close to that. I think we were within a month from where rands will be dumped by currency traders because they realize the country is on its last legs. The political games, and this is where we tie all these things in. The political games of a prisoner being released, of a president that's supposedly to be impeached, which will never happen. All these little sideshows that's being run on the side to divert your attention. Divert your attention. Is simply there to stop you from realizing what's actually happening. Okay, I will deal with my predictions in a later video. Maybe I even speak Afrikaans now, maybe in a week's time. But at this point in time, just realize, and I'm not a prophet of doom, I'm a realist. Things are getting worse, but they're getting worse at a pace that we've never seen them getting worse before. But here's the problem. There's ups and downs and downs. There's hills and valleys. We are now entering a valley. But here's the problem. There is no hill after this valley unless we create that hill. Okay? It's as simple as that. We will have to create it. How do we create it? We build a super state. We build a state and an economy on top of the state and the economy as it is today. That's the only way that we're going to survive. Okay? But once again, I will not deal with that today because I've already thrown so much information out that maybe it will take time for you to go and digest. Okay, that's the long and the short. I wanted to speak to you a little bit about China. Here's my thoughts very, very fast and very quick about it. China has a very strange and peculiar problem that they are sitting with huge ghost cities not being inhabited by anybody and building projects that simply came to a standstill and a halt. But on the other side, they are sitting with overpopulation. Now, how do the two, it's a contradiction, eh? You must think to yourself, if you have so many people, then everybody will need a place to stay. Here's the problem, they can't afford it because housing became so expensive in China that the average person in China cannot buy into the new developments. And because the new developments were mostly financed by Ponzi schemes, because it was nothing else than a Ponzi scheme. Banking is a Ponzi scheme. It's Peter paying Paul. We will discuss that one day also. The whole property market in China has not only ground to a halt, it has basically burst. And that is why people are angry. Yes, they are angry about the COVID measures. That is why they are rioting in the streets. But they are more concerned with the problem of housing, because people just simply cannot afford to be housed anymore. So they're sitting with these huge developments, ghost cities at a time, uninhabited, because there's simply no people that can buy it. They simply don't have the money. And it costs a certain amount of money to build those places. So the developers obviously came to a point where it just simply doesn't make sense to go on with the development of those properties. And that is what's really going on in China. Now, China is run in a certain way as a cash economy, totally distinct from the rest of the world. They also own the largest percentage of government bonds in the United States. Go and fact check me on this. Those people telling me, where does cryptocurrency come from? It's nothing, it's based on nothing. Well, dollar is based on nothing also. It's based actually on less than nothing, because it's based in a certain extent, to a certain extent, on government bonds by the United States government. And the Chinese owns that. Now, if China goes bust, what happens to the United States? It goes bust itself. So keep your eye on China, but not from the perspective of political dominance over the world any longer. Look at China as an economy that is bursting at its seams, and which will also, in the future, if something very drastically doesn't happen, implode. And if the Chinese economy implodes, then of course the United States will implode. Who's left as superpowers? Germany and Russia. So think about that one. Guys, long talk. It was so nice speaking to you again. And I love you. I always will be here for you. The next big battle is up. So yes, I'm here, and I'm here for the long haul. Have a tremendous day. And yes, I still salute you because you're the best.